Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, community. We're getting ready to talk about Dr. Ellen's new book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. And I know probably for a lot of you, as someone myself who has struggled with anxiety for as long as I can remember, the wisdom and the practical tools that Dr. Ellen shares not only on her Instagram account and all the social media that she puts out each and every day, which is how I crossed her path, but incredible wisdom in this new book. So I'm going to go ahead and extend an invite to her. But first, really quickly, who is Dr. Ellen? Dr. Ellen Vora is a holistic psychiatrist, acupuncturist, and yoga teacher. She takes a functional medicine approach to mental health. So totally resonate with that myself, considering the whole person and addressing imbalances at the root, which is the root cause for a lot of what most of us struggle with, in particularly anxiety. Hello, Barry. So nice of you to join us here today. Dr. Ellen Vora received her BA from Yale University and her MD from Columbia University, and she is board certified in psychiatry and integrative holistic medicine. And today, she's going to be joining me in but a second to discuss her new book, The Anatomy of Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming the Body's Fear Response. So
there she is. Well, that was seamless. Well, hello.
Hi, Nicole. It's never seamless.
Well, it's not. I tried to do my first quick aside TikTok the other night and talk about not seamless. I'm so used to the Instagram format of it. So maybe this just surprised me. But here you are.
Hi. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. I am super, super excited. And I'm imagining everyone here that's joining us live. I know anxiety is kind of one of those things that if you're human at some point along your journey, I mean, I know for me, as long as I can remember, I very much resonated with that experience of anxiety. Though I know for a lot of us, we've had those points in our life, whether or not it was a lifetime of anxiety, as I know a lot of us carry with us, or just those moments where things feel, really, really anxious all of the time. So I'm super excited to hear from you. And first and foremost, why anxiety? What kind of made you or compelled you? I know all of the different types of work you do. Why is it that a book on anxiety is you're offering to the world?
Yeah, it was really two factors. One was that I didn't fail to notice the pattern, which was that every single person coming into my office was reporting anxiety, and it might have been anxiety plus something else, but that was a pretty common theme. So I saw the scale of this problem and the need. And then the other thing, which is a little weird, is that when it comes to the full array of all the different diagnoses that we treat in the mental health capacity, in certain ways, when someone comes in and they say, like, my chief complaint is anxiety, I'm a little bit not excited, but chomping at the bit to get started. Because with anxiety, I feel like there's so much low-hanging fruit and there's so many ways to relieve suffering quickly and upfront. And that's not always the case. When someone comes in with something else, a heavier duty diagnosis, I sort of roll up my sleeves and okay, we're going to really get to work here. Anxiety, I feel like we could have a consultation. I could send someone home with a few actionable strategies and they can feel better right away. Not 100%, but we can make some incremental progress.
Well, that's incredible news. And I'm sure a lot of everyone, all the listeners out there might be feeling a little bit of hope. Because I know for those of us who've had anxiety and definitely have experienced the panic attack version, and again, I'll just speak from my own experience, hopelessness, really feeling out of control, feeling like there's actually nothing you can do to create change or to learn to live with it, or even to allow our anxiety or our panic to feel a little more manageable. So hearing, that there are actually things and hearing you describe it as low-hanging fruit. So tell me what you mean about that. I know you offer two types more or less of anxiety as one of the main messages in your book. So can you first share a little bit about what you mean about false versus true? And isn't anxiety just anxiety, or what are these two different types?
So yeah, that's the central thesis of the book. And the part that I really hope people take away so they can look at anxiety differently and feel a little bit more hopeful, more capable of making a difference in how they feel. The idea is that rather than what we were taught in the in our training and the DSM, that Bible of mental health, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. I don't know if you've burned yours by now. I think mine is, holding something up somewhere, collecting dust. So all of those ways of classifying anxiety, I didn't feel that was meaningfully steering management in my practice. Because the idea behind it, is something panic disorder with or without agoraphobia? Is it generalized anxiety disorder? The idea is to point management and say, well, what's indicated here? Medication or cognitive behavioral therapy. But those aren't my first line tools to begin with. So a more useful classification system that I just started to observe was dividing anxiety into two types: false anxiety, which is the avoidable anxiety, and true anxiety, which is purposeful anxiety. And I want to caveat, I recognize that calling it false anxiety feels, we can perceive that as somewhat invalidating. And I want to make it really clear that it's in no way, shape, or form intended to invalidate the very real suffering in false anxiety. It just speaks to the fact that there's a physical basis and there's a straightforward path out. And it's not here. Yeah, go ahead.
No, continue.
It's just not here as our deep truth. It is unnecessary suffering that's not ultimately serving us.
Right. I think what I'm hearing, and I really appreciate that clarity. So, for everyone listening, the symptoms that we're having, whether or not it's coming from false or true anxiety, are real. You are feeling your heart beat out of your chest. You might be shaking. I know for me, I started to faint as kind of an extreme shutdown response of a very overactive nervous system for me. So again, I'm really happy, Ellen, that you offered that clarification. So that's real. That's happening in my body. My heart is pounding out of my chest. Whatever it is that's happening is a very real thing. However, I think what I'm hearing you say is what's driving it.
Exactly.
Again, also very real. But before we get to the low-hanging fruit of what I'm imagining you're going to say, this false anxiety, and what are some of those deeper causes that we can begin to create actionable change around? What is the good anxiety? Why do we need it? What is that there for?
Yeah. So, that one I get pretty deep and philosophical about. But the idea here is that, part of this is just what it is to be alive in a human body and the immense vulnerability that comes with that. So much of anxiety centers around certainty, control, catastrophizing, and really anticipating worst case scenario outcomes, which if we keep peeling back the layers and boiling that down, in certain ways, it's dying and it's losing the people we love. And I would add suffering, anticipation of suffering is also a category. And that's just what it is to be in a physical body. And we can't correct that, neither with, holistic approaches or medication. Nothing touches that. I do think that within true anxiety, there's a whole section in my book about kind of seeking and exploring the questions of, well, is there something beyond what meets the eye happening here? Does that soften the edges around the ultimate worst case scenario? Does it make loss feel on some level less absolute? But I think that true anxiety, it's also purposeful. It is this inner compass nudging us. It's tapping on our shoulder and it's saying, hey, slow down. Something is not okay in your personal life, in your community, in the world at large. And, we tell people stop being so sensitive, but the people that viscerally connect to the suffering that's happening in their communities, in the world, these are not the people we should be telling to change, right? This is a gift. It's the most essentially human, pro-social, empathetic capacity. And it's also, I think, here in a sort of prophetic role. When people have a lot of true anxiety, they are sensing how we have gone astray as a culture, as a species. And so that anxiety, it's not something to pathologize. It's not something that we could gluten-free or decaf coffee our way out of. It's our true north. And it's here to tell us, slow down, listen to this, and take steps. Convert that anxiety into purposeful action. And then it doesn't feel like we're just wallowing in a helpless feeling of anxiety overwhelm. Then we transmute that feeling into one of purpose.
So I think what I'm hearing, and I use this term a lot, so members of the community will be familiar with this, it's a signal, right? Yeah. And we need that signal, and even just the kind of existential basis. I know probably people have heard that term being used. And again, I can remember back to early aspects of my anxiety where that was actually the fear. I would lay in bed with kind of contemplating two things, either just this idea of death. And I kind of describe it as it would almost overwhelm. I can even summon the feeling, my mind, my very, young mind of thinking about this idea. For me, it was of infinity of time, never ending. And it just was like conceptually a lot for me. And then I had that compounded by, because in my family home, with my mom who was suffering from chronic health issues, and my sister as well, who had a couple moments in life where there were severe things happening for her, and her life was actually, at risk even before I was born. So now I had this very real applicable fear of death through illness in my home. So I can remember back to, like I said, being a child and kind of musing over whether it was, oh my God, death and dying and ending, loss. I think that's what we're really kind of in conflict around when we're in a human body, this idea of separation, and that could end, and people I loved could not be here anymore. And that's a big feeling. And then again, those of us who have had very real risks or very real fears of risk of death or health related concerns, I think a lot of times life, death, loss all gets wrapped up into this experience of anxiety for a lot of us.
Oh, what you're saying right now, can I sort of just do a little thinking out loud about it? Because it's bringing up a lot of things. These are not like well-worn ideas for me, kind of half-baked concepts. But I think that I don't know a lot about like your family of origin, what you've been through. I've read your book, I understand snippets, but I think that especially as a parent, there's this really tricky balance to strike around like, when you have a child, it's like people describe it as your heart is walking around outside of your body. It's like the thing most important to you in the world is so vulnerably just like out in the world, this unsafe world. And I think that, if your sister's older, and so this happened even before you were born. So I just think about like, and this is some of the beauty of your work, is that to understand all these things that give us our nooks and crannies and make us up, and then, even when it's our caretakers, our parents, and how their behaviors shaped us, but then what they went through shaped their behaviors. And you can imagine if your mom went through fear around losing a child, then when you come along, she doesn't get to give you that longer leash that helps us grow, that anti-fragile understanding of ourselves, resilience, where we feel capable. Because we have a parent who, for good reason, has been traumatized by the fear of losing a child. And so then there's a kind of extra grasping and clinging. And it's super understandable. And it's also tough on the kid all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up, I think what I love to hear here, and I know a lot of your work that you shared and in this book in particular is about just that word resilience. Because what we're talking about here is extending our capacity or expanding our capacity to be able to do just that, whether or not we're, of course, diving into the deep end of this existential, very normal human anxiety that we're talking about here, or just general stress of life, right? And I just want to clarify that, because sometimes, I think some of us are of the belief, the incorrect belief and the unhelpful belief, because it sets up an expectation that's not attainable, that life is meant to be anxiety free, and to speak to even this whole concept of, kind of true anxiety, that's just simply not the case, right? And that's what resilience means. It's how can I learn how to tolerate little bits more of things that were stressful. Again, and oftentimes in childhood, to speak to your point, I didn't have the attuned caregiver, because my caregivers were so distracted in their own survival mode, right? Dealing with the fire that was very real right there for them, that it was of no ill intent. They very much wanted to show up in a loving, supportive way for me, to the extent that, and I think a lot of caregivers out there aren't even maybe aware of our survival mode and of the impact that has on the loved ones around us. So without having, a mother, just like you actually offered for me right now, right? Standing next to me as little Nicole and explaining to me, right? This is a big feeling, this idea of death and loss. And it's a lot to wrap our head around, and to even just sit down next to me on the couch and explain to me that what I was feeling was normal in that moment. For a lot of us who didn't have that, we're left to make sense of it on our own. And usually we end up feeling completely overwhelmed. We can't make sense of it. And then we figure out a way to continue to carry on life. And what that looks like for a lot of us is continuing to live in a dysregulated nervous system, continuing to maybe make choices that aren't helping our body to go back in alignment. And I even see, so let's shift a little bit and kind of distinguish true anxiety from false anxiety. Because again, these choices that we're making that I definitely know my caregivers were making, my family as a system was making, to put it bluntly, wasn't helping things, was keeping us locked again with inflammation in our bodies, unable to really balance our nervous system and not able to actually break out of those points of activation. So what is this false anxiety, and how do we know the difference, and what is causing some of what we would call false anxiety?
Yeah, God, I'm going to have a hard time staying focused on that single question because you brought up so much and my synapses are firing. Yeah, I mean, I think
wherever you want to
go. We'll see if I'll keep to it. But there's just one snippet of what you just said, which is also for anybody who's parent in the listening, or anybody who is just holding space for somebody else, a therapist, a friend. I think people often feel like, well, what am I supposed to do? What's the right way to show up? What are the right questions to ask, the right things to say? And it turns out there's nothing fancy or high tech about how to attune to people. It's in many ways, it's extremely low tech. It's you be you, and you show up and you sit by somebody and you ask some open-ended questions, and then you convey with your body language, like, that wasn't a perfunctory question. I really mean it. Like, how are you feeling about this thing that's happening? Mm-hmm. And I'm available to really sit with it. And I think that we all have that power and that capacity to attune to the people in our lives, to our children, to our friends in that way. And it's powerful medicine we can be giving for each other. To your question, false anxiety. So life is stressful, and that's inevitable. And I always like to talk about and cover ways that we can discharge that stress. We can cultivate the relaxation response. But false anxiety really speaks to the fact that a lot of the stressors in our body are not just from external events. They're precipitated by something physical, usually a state of physiologic imbalance that trips us into a stress response. And that's the part that's unnecessary. And it's happening so much in modern life, not because we're doing anything wrong, but because modern life has built up all of these default settings that have us eat in a certain way and drink certain beverages and interact with our phones in our bed, and all of these things that are really messing with our physiology. And we're kind of jacked up, and we're just bouncing like a pinball machine between different unnecessary stress responses. And it's creating a lot of what we experience as anxiety. And that's the unnecessary part. And I'll add that we make meaning of that physical sensation, because that's what our brains do. They're meaning makers. Like, if you put a piece of paper and had two dots and a line, like, I know what that is. That's a face. And if we, skip breakfast and have a strong iced coffee and then some candy and nachos for dinner, and we doom scroll, we're in a stress response. And our brain says, oh, I know why I'm stressed. It's because of this thing going on at work and this interpersonal dynamic that feels uneasy. And it'll swoop in with a narrative. It'll tell us a story about why we're stressed. And we never have any shortage of things to be stressed about. But if we could really omnisciently look under the hood in that moment and know what was going on, the reason we're stressed and anxious in that moment was something physical and actually avoidable. So the false anxieties, it's things like blood sugar crashes. That's a big one. It's sleep deprivation. It's being inflamed. Anything wrong going on with our digestive tract, micronutrient deficiencies. I think about like everything going on with screens, what it makes us do to our neck musculature, to our jaw, to our eye position. It's so many ways it kind of creates sort of physical false anxiety. There's a lot that goes on with hormones these days in modern life that also relates to false anxiety. The list goes on and on. Yeah. It's basically to say there's a lot we can do to at least chip away at the unnecessary anxiety, leaving us a little bit more resilient and calm and clear as we go to face the true anxiety that's so meaningful in how we show up in service in this world.
I think what you're describing really beautifully, and the reason why you are a holistic psychiatrist, is you're really highlighting that communication between, if we really just want to simplify it, our mind and our body. And they are in communication. For a very long time, we just thought our mind held all the power. And yes, and even in my book, I talk about the power of thought, and it can be really helpful. Of course, if we're thinking empowering thoughts, just as much as thinking not empowering thoughts can be really difficult. However, and to speak to a point you made earlier about CBT not really doing it for anxiety and really being in alignment for the treatment of it, even though for a very long time, even like still be the gold standard in how we're taught to handle any of the spectrum of anxiety. Our mind is powerful. However, so is our body. So just as much as our mind is, as we say, top down, sending all these messages, our body is sending just as many messages up to our mind. And I would have this experience, and I share this story a lot because in my intention, in my essence, whatever we want to call it, that makes me me, I like to joke and say I'm a hippie at heart. All I want to do is like peace signs, peace and love, and chill. Like that's what I'm about. Like if I really kind of peel back all my layers. However, I couldn't understand why, right? If I had a hippie moment, say for instance, I was having a moment alone or a nice peaceful Sunday and I just could chill, the thing I've always wanted to do, I kept finding myself, whether I was alone or with someone else, unable to just embody that peace, unable to be stress-free, unable to relax. No matter how much I tried to remind myself that, Nicole, there's nothing happening here today, just like you described, my very anxious body, because of all of, for me, the inflammation, all of the messages that my nervous system, my body were sending to my mind, before long, I would become either racing with all of the reasons why I can't be giving myself this day of rest, or I'd actually have agitated something, usually my relationship, if someone was present to me, with, an irritant. Oh, that look you gave me this morning, or, oh, you didn't clean up the dishes and now I can't have my stressful day. So now I'm going to rail on my partner. And before long, I'm back in my stressful moment. And I couldn't understand why. For some time, I thought it was because, well, genetically, I have anxiety. So someone who has anxiety never can rest. That's just my lot in life. What I came to understand was what we're describing here was that no, my body was having so much anxiety that it was sending those signals to my mind. And it was only a matter of time before my mind was off to the races, or before, I was then creating something stressful to deal with. And when we're talking about a human body, just going back in time, our first environment, right? When we're talking about like the impact that we carry, that began inside of another human being, meaning what is their physiology like? How regulated and safe is their nervous system? What are they eating? How much are they sleeping? I love how much are they interacting with their bed, or what is their relationship with peace and calm in their life? And just to kind of complete my story for me, like you shared earlier, intuitively, my mom had a lot of anxiety, and being a mother who was pregnant later in life, she was 42. When she even found out she was pregnant at first, she thought she was sick because she started having the symptomology of a pregnancy. And her first thought, and I actually came to learn this at her funeral when it was a story told in levity and jokes, and it is a joking story. However, I understand the truth of it now. Her first thought was, I might have stomach cancer. That's clearly what's wrong with me, because I'm not pregnant. I'm 42 years old. So what's wrong with me must be something health related, only to find out. And of course, she was very happy that she was pregnant. And then there was concerns about how I would develop given her late in life. But sharing that to describe, thinking back to the mother, right, that we were born into. What was that environment like, and how much of an impact did that have on us? And then, of course, we're born into an environment where there are choices that we're taught. There are family structures around eating, sleeping, right? All of which we don't really have a say about, definitely not when we're an infant. And again, all of which might be contributing to these deeper causes for this false anxiety that then we're saddled with for life.
Yes. Well, okay. Yes. And so we're so imprinted by these early life experiences, even what we experienced in the womb, even what we experienced when our mom was a fetus in our maternal grandmother's womb. It all imprints us because the female fetus already has everything that will go on to become her eggs, that become her offspring. while she's a fetus in her mother's womb. So it's really deep. And this is, I think, in many ways, a biologic basis for, just how we carry the trauma from past generations. And we're plastic. And I'm just, eternally, irritatingly hopeful and optimistic that there are things we can do. And that's such a delicate balance, because I'm really interested in people being hopeful while not sort of without it seeming like blame and shame and judgment. And that's a tricky line to toe, because, what we've been indoctrinated with is this idea that mental health is a genetically determined chemical imbalance in the brain. And that came as a relief originally, as a reaction to like, oh, it's a moral failing, And so to make it a disease model and to make it objective and it's not your fault, it's your genes, was a beautiful improvement upon like, there's something just wrong with you. You're just not a good person. And that's why you're suffering in this way. Thanks. Fortunately, this idea is done. But in some ways, it conveys to us this idea that it's our genetic destiny and that there's no way around it. And I think that on some levels, that's sort of comforting, because it's like, well, there's nothing I can do, so I don't need to roll up my sleeves and get to work. But it's also sort of discouraging, and we feel stuck. And I also just think it's inaccurate. And so what's really true is that absolutely there's such a thing as a genetic predisposition. There's also an epigenetic predisposition. If our maternal grandmother was disenfranchised in her life, going through stress and trauma, that impacts genetically our moms, it impacts us. But also, even though we have the genetic and the epigenetic predisposition, it's a small piece of the overall puzzle. And the environment, which includes everything, how we manage stress, how we sleep, whether we're getting sunshine, whether we have community in our lives, connection to nature, music, pleasure, all of these things are also very real determinants of our mental health. And that's the part we can control. And I don't say that as like, if you're not already doing all these things, like the meme, like I'm taking a stupid walk for my stupid mental health, right? It's not like if you're not already doing these things, then your mental health issues are your fault. It's not that. It's more like, hey, modern life has made it really conducive for our environment to manifest our genetic predisposition for mental health issues. But let's look a little closer. Let's get strategic and make some changes that can help us feel better. And they're not locked away or gatekept by an ivory tower of medicine. And that's what's so beautiful about the work you do, the idea of self-healers. Like, these are things that we can access in our own lives for free. They're non-invasive, they're safe. And it's really the fundamentals. They're not patented. They're not, no one's going to sell these to us, but we can access them. And it's about prioritizing community, prioritizing sleep, doing some breath work, making sure we connect to nature, making sure we have pleasure, relationship to music and dancing, and nourishing our bodies from a place of radical self-love, which is its own longer conversation. And I think that, I would argue also giving ourselves permission to, well, first of all, cry a lot more, and we can talk about that, but also to seek and to find what feels true for us in terms of purpose or making meaning of what it is to be alive. We don't have to arrive at an answer, but I think there's something, somewhat of a salve for anxiety, even just living those questions.
I appreciate you offering that, because so much of my past journey and what led me to really hit pivot and begin to first wonder why the traditional way I was thinking and working, not only with my clients at the time, but myself through my own anxiety, having tried all different types of individual, group, all different types of modality, in treatment. I was finding myself really disempowered, would be stuck, the number one word I heard from my clients, because I had all of the tools and all of this awareness, yet in real time, I couldn't seem to. And because I was missing big pieces of it, I wasn't fully understanding my nervous system at that time. And until I did, I wasn't able to, like we're talking about, really get my body on board to help me then to be able to, in those moments, be able to implement changes. I didn't realize how dysregulated my body was and how dysregulating a lot of the choices that I was making in my very modern life. So to speak to your point, I mean, I know you live in New York City. I spent almost a decade there in my 20s. A lot of us are living in environments that are challenging. The amount of noise, the amount of people that we're exposed to daily, our sleep habits, the technology that most of us live with in our pockets, we go to bed with even at night. All of these, when we think about, as I do often, our natural state, right? Kind of putting us back on the plains, in our earliest groups or clans, like how did humans evolve? I mean, for most of us, at least, and I'm sure many of you on the live, that's not what life looks like for you when you look outside of the window that you might not even have access to in the room that you're in. I mean, I've been in New York City apartments where some rooms didn't have windows, right? So talk about the choices that we make each day. And if you were to kind of we talked a little bit about technology, about sleep, about community, about nutrition, what would you suggest is kind of the lowest hanging fruit that for those who this is completely new information and, it might feel overwhelming to have a list of 5 new things to start to do tomorrow. What would you suggest would be the most foundational place to get curious about or to begin, and what change can we go from there?
Yes. Thank you for keeping us on track and having some actionable takeaways. So here we go. We're simplifying this as much as possible. I think one of the most impactful changes that we can all make is actually to just have a boundary around not bringing the phone into the bedroom at night.
Not surprised you were going to go there. So please talk about this phone, because I've been exploring and noticing all of the different ways phones affect me. Phones are very real, part of our life. So assuming they're going to continue to be a real part of our life.
Yeah, they can still be a part of our life. But that's the sacred boundary, is basically what you do is you set up your charger somewhere else. If you're concerned about, missing important calls overnight, you can let the charger be just outside your bedroom door. It can still be in earshot, but not on your bedside table, not clutched to your chest while you sleep. Because the fact of the matter is, if it's there, it's the last thing we look at before bed. It's the first thing we look at when we wake up. We glance at it at 2 a.m. when we wake up to pee. And that's destructive to our mental health in a number of different ways. One is simply the blue spectrum light that it emits. That's disrupting our circadian rhythm. So it's basically sending this really confusing message to our brain saying, the sun is rising, good morning, suppress melatonin, release cortisol, even if it's 4 a.m. And so light is so critical to regulating our sleep-wake cycle. And the phone is a really strong signal of light into our eyes, up to our brain. So that alone is a factor. There's also the fact that we're in the attention economy. Smart companies know their behavioral psychology and their neuroscience, and they know that if there's no natural stopping point, we will scroll forever. No one has ever said, look, I got to the end of TikTok. Now let me put my phone to the side and to get wholesome bedtime.
Check.
Yeah, right.
Finish TikTok for today.
And then there's also the fact that, they know the algorithm is conducive to fear, uncertainty, doubt, controversy. This is what makes us rubberneck. We give an increasingly large share of our attention. They win. They get more ad revenue, more clicks, more of our attention. But our mental health and our sleep are the collateral damage. So even just having that boundary around the phone in terms of whether or not it comes in with you to the bedroom, that makes a huge impact on our sleep quality and our overall well-being, because sleep is one of the most important medicines for every single mental health issue. So that's number one. Number 2,
sleep, just to go with sleep really quickly, I think it's one of those areas too where it's quite overlooked, I think, for a lot of us. I don't think we're as realistic with ourselves about how much time we're getting in the bedroom. And if we are in the bedroom, I don't think we're, to speak to your point, spending that time on allowing our body to go into a sleep mode. And as I used to tell my clients all the time, the process of sleep begins before you close that bedroom door and put your head on that pillow. Yeah. And to speak to your point, those of us who are scrolling or bringing phones into the bedroom, we're not cueing our body that it's time to sleep. So once even we put our phone down, right, now our body needs to settle. And so we might be spending more hours in time trying to sleep than we are actually at successfully sleeping. And so for me, just to share quickly, my phone and putting up that sacred boundary was foundational for my relationship with my body, anxiety, and sleep in particular, because historically, I wouldn't go to bed without my phone next to me in case something happened at home. I was always waiting for that call that was going to tell me that final shoe. So all of this is so interconnected to anxiety. So my first boundary was, how can I go to sleep And what I would rest myself assured with was most of the time I was living far from the people who would be having the emergency. So my mindset was, if I got the call at 3 a.m. versus 6 a.m. when my eyes opened, right? What real difference there? The emergency will still be there in the morning, and I'll tend to it once I've gotten a more complete night of sleep. So that was the first assurement, like kind of step out of the bedroom for my phone. And that was really helpful because I would look anytime I woke up. I not only see what time it was, make sure no one texted me. And if someone was on the other end, now I open myself up to whatever reaction I might have based on whatever it is that I saw. And then the next boundary that I'm always negotiating with my phone is those of us who are put our phone away. When do we choose to pick it up? Because for me, I got very savvy at knowing that my phone can be my stressor. When I'm having that moment, like we were talking about earlier, my body is activated and I want to know why. I know exactly which pages that are going to piss me off. And I will go there and I'll talk about doom scrolling. And I'll do some doom scrolling and I'll affirm that I feel the way I do for this particular reason. And a lot of us do that. So really getting conscious around what is our full relationship with our phone in terms of stress, in terms of sleep and relaxation, and how can we hold ourselves accountable more or less. And I'm still finding ways that I need to hold myself accountable to what I'm doing on my phone because everything is available on our phones at any time.
You brought up so much. I hope you have time because we got to just touch on this briefly. I think one thing is like, yes. So if you are sort of waiting for that emergency call overnight, I find that people fall into two different categories. One is if they know they might get the call at any moment, they can't fall asleep. So then it's actually about putting the boundary and recognizing 6 a.m. would be early enough to handle it. And other people, if they know that the phone is sort of out of earshot, then they can't sleep. And so for them, it's like set up the charger a little further away from the bed. Make sure your settings are adjusted so that a call from favorites or a double call will break through the do not disturb function. And you can kind of rest assured that if in the event of an emergency, you're going to hear the call and have your people know, don't just text an emergency, which people typically wouldn't do. And I think that the reason we sort of self-sabotage and look at the pages that we know will gin up our stress response, it connects back to the way we're hardwired for community. And this is just it. Like on the proverbial savanna of evolution, human beings, we were never the strongest. We were never the fastest. We were simply the ones who figured out how to cooperate most effectively. And that's why we've survived. And this is why it's deep in our DNA that we feel safe when we feel held in community. And if something is awry in our relationships, that's very distressing. And on the proverbial savanna, it's a matter of life or death. In modern life, it's different than that. And I think that, places like social media, this is where you're never going to have a shortage of people that disagree or misunderstand you, or, it's a place where we come without full accountability and we're hurting people. We're bringing all of our own stress and tension from our lives and kind of dumping it all over. And I think that we can really fixate on that. I know I do. And it's like you can, it's a weird, it feels sort of like this self-destructive practice to be like, these comments are really messing up my nervous system. Why do I continue to read them? And I'll tell myself I'm looking for that pearl of something useful here. I'm looking for the feedback that helps me grow and change. It's a little bit true, but I think it is also the way we'll obsess over, am I okay? Am I liked by the tribe, the community on the savannah? And if I'm not, I better figure that out. Otherwise, I'm going to be ostracized and alone, just me against the leopards. And I think that is why it feels like something we really need to hone in on. But I think it's tough because we're in the modern world where it isn't quite so life or death. And we can surround ourselves with the people that call us in, but are ultimately rooting for us to grow and change.
I got chills when you talked about, kind of our evolution in terms of cooperation. And those of you listening might have heard, humans referred to as we're wired to connect. We're an interpersonal species. All of that really does kind of is capitalizing or is highlighting, that power that we have, because that is a power, the ability to care enough, right? And all of this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, anxiety as a signal, right? Us using our bodies to sense danger and to keep those of us that we are loved and supported by and that are the most meaningful us because of their connection to our literal survival safe along with us. We aren't, humans on an island at all. We need those groups of people. And I think what you're bringing up is another layer of, I call it learning. We're in a learning stage of humanity in a lot of ways now, because this is the first time. And I was speaking with someone recently, and we were talking about how in a lot of ways, even when you and I connected on social media, right? This is the first time that we are humans now in this global community that is whatever the platform is that you're using, where we have access to other humans from around the world. And this is new, to say the least. We didn't have that. Unless you lived in my little neighborhood, I might not even have know about your type of person, because I wouldn't have been exposed to it. And now every day at the click of a button, right, we have the ability to connect, to see, aspects of us and our experience in someone else, and to also see differences that abound in this global collective. So I think as comforting as that can be, and one of the main reasons I went online as a psychologist at the time, I was told never to be a human, right? Never to create a profile where you're just Nicole and you're sharing, God forbid, about your personal life. So a lot of us in the field were even taught not to water down the individual side of us. And seeing that this was an opportunity to be an individual, it still was a new space. So now we all have these platforms of individual self-expression interacting with all other very diverse individuals from around the world. So and I tend to be like you, I tend to look at, the hope of it, because for me, that gave me the opportunity to connect with people like yourself and people in the community who were living a similar enough journey that it felt relatable, that then became my community of people with whom to begin to build these deeper, more authentic relationships. So that's the hopeful side of it. But of course, there's all of the challenge that comes along with, I think, navigating this global collective that we're evolving into.
It's such a both and, because it's a beautiful thing that, like, if you're kind of a weirdo, like I'm different than the people I went to medical school with, the people I train in psychiatry with, I see things differently, and that can be lonely. And then the interwebs allows us to find our community and be like, you see this the same way as I do. And that's like, it's so grounding. It's such a nice feeling to be on the same wavelength sometimes, and to be able to talk shop and bounce ideas around and learn. And, like writing a book, you put it out into the world, and it's your art, it's your baby, it's your ideas, it's imperfect, and you put it out there, and then it's just out in the world to be hated, misunderstood, liked, whatever. And I find myself on a daily basis, I come back to, I sort of do it as a kind of like like a prayer or a communication with my mom who passed away. And I sort of have a conversation with her about the book. And I kind of ask for support in letting go of ego, letting go of insecurity, and just like keep coming back to the idea of what's my intention here. And it's like, show up and do my reasonable best at creating something that can help people, and then release it and remain unattached from the outcome. And when I say my reasonable best, I really I wrote this book while working as a mom with very unpredictable childcare in a pandemic, which felt important in terms of my writing process. Was like, I was really in it in terms of, I'm writing about how do we cultivate calm and resilience in the face of strife. And it's like, okay, I have some very real world data to work off of. And I think, I think it's actually really an important takeaway is that when we try to do our best and show up and give everything our 150% effort and bend ourselves into a pretzel and squeeze out any possibility of failure, like we drive ourselves crazy, and we still don't completely control the outcome. And so I really think it's such a good salve to anxiety to give ourselves permission to show up and do our reasonable best. Something you can feel proud of, but it's sustainable and it doesn't get you out of balance. And so, yeah, I think the internet is an interesting both and with this. We can feel so seen and so connected and so misunderstood all at the same time. But I find what's so protective is all I can do is do my reasonable best, put it out there trying to help and let go.
Yeah, I was actually want to honor you. I was watching one of your stories the other day where you were walking your child to school and kind of acknowledging your intention that you were just sharing here, which is that, there's a lot going on in your life. And having been through a book launch myself, I can only imagine what your schedule is, and even carving out those moments to just be present to the walk to school, however present you were able to be, of course. And I think that's where this idea of perfectly imperfect, or learning how to just, be where we're at in any given moment. I know, as someone who has a history of always setting bars up so high for myself and always trying to get it all done and be perfect and check all the boxes over here professionally and then be perfectly present to everyone else in my life. And again, those are, for a lot of us, very unrealistic expectations, and anxiety, just bring the conversation very much full circle, inducing one. So the more we can kind of peel it back and learn how to embrace whatever it is for us, our messiness in a given moment, a crazy book launch week, and a couple moments to be present, on a walk to school. For most of us, in my opinion, that's where life is happening. However, when we're in our mind about all the other places we should be, we're really limiting our opportunity to, words you brought up earlier, to be connected, to be right, kind of beautifully attuned to whatever is here now.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yeah. I feel like we should. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say we should maybe touch upon the concept of psych meds. I wonder if that's on anybody's mind while we have this conversation. What do you think? Is that a direction you'd want to go?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're open.
Yeah, I think it's important because we take, it's in our name, right? We take a holistic approach. And like, what the heck does that mean? Nobody, when we say it, I think what we mean something similar, which is, well, we're not just thinking about mental health from like the neck up. It's the whole person. It really broadens in a lot of different directions. It's your genes, but it's also your community and your connection to nature and your diet and your gut health and your, it's everything in your environment and back generations. And I think that, I think really holistically about mental health. And, I think that sometimes people perceive that as being kind of like a, dogmatic or sort of adversarial stance against conventional medicine. I think sometimes I do kind of get like a little saucy and take an adversarial stance against conventional medicine, working through my trauma from my training. But I think that, I really, it's a nice thing about, I think I'm about 10 years into practice at this point, and it's a really nice, humbling work, because just as soon as I've latched onto any kind of dogmatic idea of like, I've got this figured out, I know how to help patients, something always kicks me in the teeth and teaches me like, no, you don't got it figured out. And, that has happened enough times at this point that I really realized that like, I actually am so supportive of so many different approaches. I'm not invested in being right about this approach to anxiety. I'm interested in reducing human suffering by whatever means. And I think that I've seen so many of my patients benefit from medication and, give the sort of like full court approach to the holistic strategies. And at the end of the day, they needed a medication as a bridge to get out of a place and get to more solid ground where they could start to do these practices. And I've also seen, in a way that to me is like a more important, underserved part of the mental health population. I've seen a lot of people not find medications to be sufficiently helpful. And I feel like in a way, if meds are working for you, my holistic approach is not intended to make somebody second guess that or feel like it's the wrong approach. Like if meds are working, hallelujah, and like go forth. If you've found your path, that's great. But you probably don't need me because like the existing system is working for you. But there's all these millions of people for whom the existing system is not working. And I think that it's for those folks that I want them to know there's reason for hope. There's more that you can do. If you feel like you've been chewed up and spit out by the mental health world, if you feel discouraged, like you tried every medication and nothing's working, or it works and then the effect fades, or you experience side effects, whatever the case may be, it's those folks. I want them to know meds are not the only path up this mountain. There's so many other things we can do. My book outlines like a buffet, which is not to say you have to do all these things. It's that you reach for what feels doable, accessible, what resonates, but there's going to be some path there that at least helps you in your journey. And I think if anything, we're just missing a little bit of the informed consent in that initial conversation about meds. We need more time. Like, practitioners need more time with patients so they can actually talk through what's really going on with you, what really are some realistic possibilities of what happens with these meds. What would it be like to eventually get off these meds? I think that's missing from the conversation. But if you're on a med and it's working, this is great. Like, we just want everyone to find their path to feel well.
I appreciate you going there, Ellen, and discussing all of that. And when I say, and I couldn't agree more with this informed consent model and the need for an informed consent model, because what I think we're both acknowledging is needed is more information, right? Because the people who are out there, and I myself have worked with and known personally many people that fall into that camp of medication didn't work, and actually led me to only feel more disempowered, because all along the way, I couldn't help but wonder, why is everyone else getting better and I can't? There must be something wrong, inherently, intrinsically with me, that which is supposed to, even the professionals maybe that are in front of me telling me it's supposed to work, it's not working. And before long, what most of us do, unfortunately, or what a lot of us have learned to do, I should say, is to believe everyone out there and not our own instinct that's saying, this isn't working for you. There is something that this isn't feeling aligned for. There are symptoms that have now began in your life as a result of taking, or whatever the journey is. So in terms of, and that's why I love your work, I love your new book here, The Anatomy of Anxiety. It's because what you're offering is other information. And for me, that was life-changing. Not having had access when I was in school, when I was on my own journey, trying to heal my own anxiety for a very long time, to this information is what kept me stuck. And that's one of the reasons why I do the work I do as well, which is to present other information with our goal, and not to speak for you, but I imagine it's very much the same, which is to empower that human who has those instincts, that inner knowing, who is kind of knowing what path is aligned for them and which path isn't, and to begin to put more trust in that. Take in information from experts, get support from those in your life, but don't do that at your own expense. Don't overstep, right, that inner knowing. So I, see such a beacon, again, of hope in the work that you put out into the world, and in the work that is between these pages of The Anatomy of Anxiety, because I know that this is what this book will offer people, is the information to have a deeper understanding of what might be causing the symptoms that they're suffering, and the practical then approach, the tools, the how to now build that bridge to begin to make change.
Yeah. And I think we share this experience. Like, that's my story too, is that I was sort of in a state of false depression overlaid on top of a layer of true depression. And my process was really inefficient, and it was so demoralizing to feel like I saw the right doctors. I did what they recommended, and at a certain point it wasn't helping. They're like, okay, I can't help you. And that's devastating when you're like, wait, I'm so broken that this, like, they don't even know what to suggest next. And so you can feel so discouraged, so hopeless. And that's on top of, when you're struggling with anxiety or depression, you already see things through the lens of depression or anxiety. Things already feel overwhelming and hopeless. And then you layer on top of that feeling like the conventional strategies are ineffective, and you're like, this is grim. And I went on this 10-year journey of going down lots of dead ends of like, how can I feel better? And in the end, it gave me a lot of tools and a lot of sympathy for like where people get stuck and where they struggle. And in many ways, the book is just what I wish I had. And it's saying like, let me consolidate the learnings of 10 years of getting my own health back into balance and 10 years of medical practice and put those learnings in one book so that someone who is feeling stuck and is really struggling has somewhere to turn and has some suggestions to try. And I really like that you brought up like trusting ourselves. And you're exactly right. Like it's not to completely ignore like, experts and trusted practitioners and whoever in your life you feel like they have something to offer. Take that in, but always discern like, does this feel like a yes to me, or does that actually not resonate? Take the good, leave the bad, and never forget to listen internally. And I think our world conditions us to ignore that. I know I did. I was for years sort of silenced my intuition because I felt like it was not safe to be embracing intuition. I didn't want to be seen as an irrational, crazy woman. And I wanted to be accepted in the boys' club. I wanted to be seen as objective and rational and good at math. And so that's what I leaned into. But it was a betrayal of a part of myself. And eventually I learned to embrace both aspects of myself, but very much actually celebrating and embracing and inviting in my intuition as another tool, another compass for navigating the vagaries of life. And I really like encouraging everybody to dust off their connection with their intuition. And we don't need to be ashamed of it. It's really a beautiful compass.
I love this kind of ending here with this idea of another and, right? All of this at once. I think that's so much more emblematic of human, the complexity of us as creatures. And the more we can expand into, I have my intuition, I can take in all this information from the outside world, and I can feel a million different ways about one thing. And, the more we can expand into that space where we can become and another, here's some extra tools. It doesn't have to be kind of this one thing. And oftentimes it isn't. And we are very, very complex creatures. So before we end here, thank you, Dr. Ellen, for all of which that you put out into this world and for this incredible book. And can you let us all know where we can go ahead and find our own copy of The Anatomy of Anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, you can, like, as they say, buy it wherever books are sold. My personal bias is like, try to support your local bookstore, try to support Black-owned businesses, use your dollars somewhat strategically, but you can get it pretty much anywhere right now. And I really hope it's helpful. And I'm also really open to feedback and gentle, loving feedback, because I really do want to learn how to meet people's needs better. But I hope that this is a good start.
Well, I am so grateful for having connected with you, however long ago that it was, and so excited. Actually, I sit with you, alongside of you, in hope for the future that is all of us universally here. And I'm super excited to continue to watch your journey, to continue on my journey, and I imagine our paths will continue to cross. So anyone who's interested, give Ellen a follow. She puts out incredible content on all of these social media platforms. And I definitely suggest grabbing her book. Again, The Anatomy of Anxiety, for anyone else who joined us late. And yes, so everyone who's asking for this live to be saved, I will make sure that this live is saved on my page. And thank you, Ellen, for your time, your energy, your presence. And I'm sending you all of my love and holding you in heart as you continue to navigate all things your book launch. So thank you for everything you put out into the world.
Thank you. And can I just add, thank you. This is such a generous, chunk of your time. And I think I speak for every single person who's tuning in today, just gratitude, appreciation for what you put out. It is changing our lives, and it's such a force of nature. And, I really think it's, spreading light and healing in a very earth-changing way. And thanks for doing what you do.
Of course. Well, thank you. Thank you for everyone out there listening, because when we talk about changing the earth, changing the world, this is, in my opinion, how it happens. We take in new information, we shift and change just a little bit. And in my opinion, the ripples that we create, whether or not you're front facing on an Instagram live like you and I are, the ripples we're creating in our families, in our communities, in my opinion, are life changing. And yes, for anyone asking, your full name, her full name is Dr. Ellen Vora. Her page will be linked up. This live will be saved. Her book can be purchased everywhere books are purchased. And thank you again for your time today. Ellen.
Thanks,
I
Nicole.
appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Have
for
a good
being
one,
here.
everyone, and thank you all for listening.